So we are constantly told to, listen to our bodies. I mean, it's basically become the ultimate cliche of modern
Oh,
wellness.
absolutely.
You
Yeah.
hear it everywhere,
Yeah.
from like yoga instructors, well-meaning friends, social media.
Right.
But the reality is, trying to actually listen to your biology right now in the modern world, it's like trying to hear a whisper while standing on the tarmac next to a screaming jet engine.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. Because the environment we live in is actively designed to jam your biological signals. I mean, every time your phone lights up with a notification or every time you eat some hyper-engineered, ultra-processed snack, you're flooding your system with artificial noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Your body's trying to send you these critical messages about what it needs, but those messages are just being drowned out. They're scrambled. Honestly, they're entirely hijacked.
And, we aren't just talking about a vague sense of being out of touch here.
Right.
We are talking about the disruption of measurable, really powerful biochemical pathways. I mean, the stakes here are absolute. These chemical messengers, they determine whether you open your eyes in the morning feeling like a surge of genuine vitality or whether you have to literally drag yourself out of bed.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. They dictate whether you can maintain a healthy weight without thinking about it, or whether you spend your entire day fighting off these white-knuckle cravings.
Yeah, fighting your own body.
Exactly. If you don't understand the vocabulary your body is using to speak to you, you are fighting a permanent uphill battle against your own evolutionary wiring.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are cutting through the noise for you. We are decoding your body's internal messaging system by zeroing in on 3 absolute master hormones: cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin.
The big 3.
The big 3. And we're drawing on a really comprehensive breakdown from human biologist Gary Brecka, specifically his work on the Ultimate Human video and podcast series.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
It really is.
Yeah.
He lays out the physiological reality of how these 3 specific hormones basically run the control room of your weight, your energy, and your stress.
And it is a critical synthesis, honestly, because it moves us away from this toxic idea of willpower and grounds our daily struggles in pure endocrinology.
Right.
If you are exhausted or if you are constantly hungry, I mean, it is incredibly liberating to realize that it's not a moral failing.
It's not your fault.
Exactly. It is a biological equation. And once you understand the variables of that equation, like how leptin signals energy availability, how ghrelin drives the acquisition of that energy.
And how cortisol manages it all.
Yes. Once you see that, you can actually start to solve the math.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the most misunderstood variable in that equation. It's a word that, honestly, it practically triggers a stress response just by hearing it.
Cortisol.
Cortisol, right. It's almost exclusively discussed as this toxic substance. I mean, you see entire industries built around flushing or banishing cortisol.
Oh, yeah. The supplements, the detoxes.
But the source material immediately throws a wrench in that narrative. It argues that this so-called bad hormone is actually the reason we are alive to even have this conversation.
Yeah, the vilification of cortisol is probably one of the greatest misunderstandings in popular health today.
Really?
Oh, for sure. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid, right? It's produced by your adrenal glands, and its primary evolutionary function is to mobilize resources.
Okay.
An acute spike in cortisol is your body's survival protocol. So imagine you encounter a physical threat.
Like a tiger.
Like a tiger, yeah. Your brain perceives danger, and within milliseconds, a signal travels to your adrenals.
Yeah.
And they just dump cortisol into your bloodstream.
And what does that actually do?
Well, it immediately frees up stored glucose from your liver, floods your muscles with energy, narrows your visual focus, and essentially overclocks your entire nervous system so you can fight or run.
Wow.
It is an exquisite, life-saving mechanism.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's not that cortisol is inherently damaging. The issue is the duration of the signal. Like, a biological system is designed to handle an intense acute spike, deal with the threat, and then just return to baseline. The pathology only begins when that system gets stuck in the on position.
Precisely. You know, the human body is remarkably resilient to acute stress. It can handle a lot.
Right.
But it is horribly equipped for chronic stress. And the problem we face today is that the brain doesn't distinguish between the physical threat of a predator and the psychological threat of a late-night email from your boss.
Oh, man, the late-night emails.
Or a looming mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Or even just the constant low-grade anxiety of scrolling through negative news on your phone.
Yeah.
Your brain perceives the threat, and it orders the adrenals to release cortisol. But because the threat never actually resolves in a physical burst of energy, I mean, you just sit at your desk and worry.
The cortisol just stays there.
It stays in the bloodstream, the baseline becomes permanently elevated.
And that elevated baseline completely destroys what should be a very elegant daily rhythm. Because, I mean, cortisol isn't just an emergency response system. It is deeply tied to our circadian biology, right?
It is the biological metronome for your day.
Metronome, I like that.
Yeah, in a healthy, regulated system, you experience what is called the cortisol awakening response.
Okay, what is that?
Within the first 30 to 45 minutes of opening your eyes in the morning, your cortisol levels should surge. They should reach their absolute peak for the entire 24-hour cycle.
Which makes perfect sense evolutionarily, right?
Right.
Like, you need that massive surge of mobilized energy to get up, leave the cave, and start hunting or foraging.
Exactly.
It's basically the biological equivalent of hitting the ignition switch on a car engine.
That's a highly accurate way to look at it. It is your built-in biological caffeine.
Right.
But here's the critical part of the design. After that morning peak, the levels are supposed to initiate this slow, gradual, continuous decline throughout the entire afternoon and evening. By the time you are preparing for bed, your cortisol should be at its absolute rock bottom lowest point.
Got it.
Because that biological silence is the necessary precondition for your pineal gland to release melatonin, which allows you to transition into deep, restorative sleep.
But look at how modern life engineers the exact opposite of that curve. I mean, we wake up in dark rooms looking at screens instead of sunlight, so we miss the optical trigger for that morning cortisol spike.
Yep.
We feel sluggish, so we artificially force the spike with like 3 cups of coffee.
Right.
Then we spend the entire day sitting in a posture of tension, dealing with all these micro stressors, and just when the cortisol is supposed to hit rock bottom at, 10:00 p.m., we are lying in bed, bathed in blue light from a smartphone, reading something infuriating on social media.
Yeah, you are describing the exact mechanism of a flattened and inverted cortisol curve.
Inverted curve. Wow.
When you introduce blue light and psychological stress late at night, you are tricking the brain into thinking it is the middle of the day and there is a crisis.
So the adrenals just pump out cortisol.
They pump out cortisol, the melatonin is suppressed, and sleep basically becomes impossible. And as the source points out, when you disrupt this specific master curve, it is not an isolated failure.
Right, because it affects everything else.
Exactly. Cortisol interacts with insulin, it interacts with thyroid hormones, it interacts with testosterone and estrogen. If the cortisol rhythm is flattened, the entire hormonal orchestra falls out of tune.
Let's move past the common metaphors here, because I feel like comparing it to a fire alarm doesn't quite capture the biological cost.
Okay.
Let's think of your body's energy reserves like a city's power grid.
I like this.
Right? So an acute cortisol spike is the mayor ordering all non-essential power to be diverted to the emergency response teams to handle a localized crisis. Streetlights go dark, the park shut down, but the hospitals and fire stations get maximum voltage. That's fine for an hour. But if the mayor leaves the city in that state of emergency for 5 years...
The infrastructure crumbles.
Exactly. The roads don't get paved. The city falls apart from the inside out. And that's what chronic cortisol does to your tissue and your immune system, isn't it?
That perfectly illustrates the concept of biological triage.
Biological triage.
Yeah. Chronic cortisol literally breaks down muscle tissue for quick energy. It suppresses your immune system because, frankly, fighting off a future cold isn't a priority if you're being chased by a tiger right now.
Right. The body's like, we'll deal with the cold later if we survive the next 10 minutes.
Exactly. And it halts digestion. The wear and tear on the infrastructure is just devastating over time.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most urgent question for the listener. If we are trapped in this modern grid, how do we force the city out of its emergency state?
Yeah.
If the baseline is chronically elevated, how do we biologically stand down?
Yeah.
Because clearly just telling someone to stress less is completely useless advice.
It is entirely useless. It addresses a physiological problem with a psychological platitude.
Yeah.
But the source material dives into a systemic review of clinical trials that actually measured what interventions mechanically lower baseline cortisol. And they found something fascinating regarding how we approach stress reduction.
I'm guessing it's not a single magic pill.
Far from it. The data revealed that isolated interventions, say, deciding to run on a treadmill for 20 minutes or trying to meditate once a week,
Right.
they certainly offer acute benefits, but they do not permanently reset that elevated baseline.
Oh, it does.
The true long-term shift in the nervous system was achieved through a concept called stacking.
Stacking.
Yes. The researchers found that combining multiple deliberate physiological interventions creates this compounding effect that physically forces the body out of that chronic fight-or-flight state.
So layering biological signals to overwhelm the stress response.
Exactly.
I love this approach because it moves us from defense to offense. And one of the most compelling stacks the source explores is this phenomenon of the nature pill. I want to dive deep into this because it validates something humans have intuitively known forever. I mean, when you walk into a dense forest or sit by the ocean, there's a tangible physical shift in your body. But the science shows this isn't just a pleasant psychological placebo, is it?
Not at all. It is a rigorously documented biochemical event. The research indicates that just 20 to 30 minutes of immersion in a green space physically alters your neurobiology.
Wow. 20 minutes.
Yeah, it actively stimulates the parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system.
And for the listener, just to clarify, the parasympathetic system is the rest, digest, and repair network.
Right.
It is the direct biological antagonist to the sympathetic fight-or-flight network we were just talking about.
Exactly. You cannot be in both states simultaneously. It is a biological seesaw.
Yep.
When you activate the parasympathetic system by exposing your visual and olfactory senses to nature, you are actively applying the brakes to what is known as the HPA axis.
The HPA axis, break that down for us.
The hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. That is the specific biological supply chain that manufactures cortisol.
Got it.
The hypothalamus in the brain sends a signal called CRH to the pituitary gland. The pituitary then sends a hormone called ACTH down to the adrenal glands, basically telling them to produce cortisol.
So the nature pill essentially cuts the communication lines between the brain and the adrenal glands.
It dampens the initial signal right at the hypothalamus.
Okay.
The environmental cues of nature, so the specific fractal patterns of tree branches, the ambient sounds of wind or water, even the chemical compounds called phytoncides that trees release into the air.
Phytoncides.
Yeah, these are airborne chemicals.
Yeah.
The brain interprets all of these inputs as signals of profound safety.
Wow.
So the brain just stops sending the crisis signal. The HPA axis quiets down, and the cortisol production dramatically drops.
That is incredible.
And this is supported by massive meta-analyses showing incredible reductions in circulating cortisol and increases in stress resilience just from regular environmental exposure.
I mean, it makes complete sense. For 99.9% of human history, our nervous systems developed in those exact environments.
Right.
Our brains are hardwired to recognize those specific sights and smells as our baseline reality. It's like traditional Chinese medicine's concept of forest bathing, but now we actually have the clinical assays to prove it's altering our endocrinology.
It bridges the gap between ancient intuition and modern measurable biology perfectly. But, the source takes this concept of parasympathetic activation even further.
Into things you can control every day, right?
Exactly. Specifically, the mechanics of breath.
Let's talk about the hardware involved here, because
Right.
this is where the biohacking gets really accessible for people.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the vagus nerve.
Oh, the vagus nerve is the absolute superhighway of your parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
It's the 10th cranial nerve, and it wanders from your brainstem all the way down through your chest, connecting to your heart, your lungs, and your digestive tract.
It's huge.
It is the physical cable that transmits the stand-down order to your organs.
And we have manual control over this cable, don't we?
We do, and the access point is the diaphragm.
Okay.
The source highlights that just 5 minutes of deep diaphragmatic breathing physically stimulates the vagus nerve.
Just 5 minutes.
Just 5. When you take a slow, deep breath in and an even slower breath out, you alter the intrathoracic pressure in your chest cavity.
Right.
This pressure change is detected by baroreceptors, which immediately send a signal up the vagus nerve to the brain.
And how does the brain react?
The brain responds by releasing acetylcholine. That's a neurotransmitter that physically slows down your heart rate and halts the stress cascade.
So by mechanically moving the muscles of the chest and abdomen, we are reverse engineering a state of calm.
Exactly.
We are literally tricking the brain into realizing we are safe.
It is entirely reverse engineering. Think about it. If you are running from a threat, your breathing is rapid and shallow. The brain knows that.
Right.
By forcing the breath to be slow and deep, you provide undeniable physical evidence to the brain that there is no threat.
That's amazing.
And when you combine this deep diaphragmatic breathing with physical movement, you achieve what the researchers call neuroendocrine modulation.
Okay, neuroendocrine modulation.
Right.
Let's break that down because it sounds like a term from a really dense medical textbook, but it's incredibly practical. We are talking about mind-body practices like yoga or Tai Chi, right?
Correct. When you practice Tai Chi, for example, you are layering focused visual attention, slow, controlled movement, and deep vagal breathing all at once. Stacking, you are modulating, which just means regulating or adjusting the endocrine system, which is your hormone network, using the neurological signals generated by your movement.
Wow.
You are teaching the nervous system, through repetition, how to efficiently switch tracks from the sympathetic stress response to the parasympathetic recovery response. You are building biological flexibility.
I hear all this, and the biology is fascinating, but I need to play the skeptic here for a moment.
Fair enough.
Because you are describing forest bathing, mountain retreats, complex mind-body integration. The reality is, I live in a dense, noisy, concrete jungle.
Right.
I work in a high-rise. I spend my days staring at asphalt and glass. I can't just book a remote safari to reset my HPA axis.
Yeah.
So does this mean my biology is just permanently compromised by my zip code?
It is the most common pushback, and honestly, it's highly logical given how we talk about nature and wellness circles, but the source material is deeply encouraging on this specific point.
Really?
Yeah. The clinical trials do not require untouched, pristine wilderness to observe the parasympathetic shift.
Yeah?
The human brain is remarkably sensitive to even minor natural inputs. A community garden, a local city park, or literally just walking down a straight line with mature trees for 20 minutes provides enough visual and sensory data to initiate that biological shift.
So the brain just needs a glimpse of the fractal patterns. It just needs a reminder of the natural world to hit the brakes.
Exactly. It's not about escaping modern life. It's about introducing microdoses of evolutionary signals into your daily routine.
I love that. Microdoses of evolutionary signals.
Yeah. It's using a 5-minute breathing exercise at your desk or a 20-minute walk through a park on your lunch break to continuously tell the HPA axis to stand down. We need the cortisol to wake up and handle acute challenges, but we must use these stacked interventions to force the baseline back down to zero.
Which acts as the perfect transition, honestly. Because if cortisol represents the biological protocol for spending energy and dealing with immediate demands, we have to look at the other side of the physiological coin. How does the body regulate the acquisition and storage of that energy? If we connect this to the bigger picture, we move from the stress of survival to the absolute core of human metabolism. The Hunger Games.
And this is where we dive into the master controllers of your appetite, the interconnected dynamic of leptin and ghrelin.
Right.
These two hormones, they dictate almost every decision you make regarding food, whether you realize it or not.
Let's establish the players on the board, because these are two opposing forces locked in a constant, delicate tug of war. Let's start with leptin. Where does it come from, and what exactly is it trying to do?
Well, leptin is a hormone with a very unique origin. It is produced almost entirely by your body's fat cells, which are scientifically known as adipocytes.
Fat cells produce hormones.
Yes. This means your fat tissue is not just a passive storage unit for excess calories like a closet.
Right.
It is an active, vital endocrine organ. The function of leptin is to communicate the status of your energy reserves directly to your brain.
So it's essentially taking inventory.
Precisely. As your body stores more energy, so as those adipocytes grow larger, they secrete more leptin into your bloodstream.
Okay.
This leptin travels up to your brain and delivers a highly specific message. We have abundant energy stored. Suppress the appetite, and let's increase our energy expenditure. We can afford to burn calories.
It is the ultimate biological I'm full signal.
Exactly.
Now, the counterweight to leptin is ghrelin. And ghrelin doesn't come from fat cells, right?
No, ghrelin is manufactured primarily in the stomach and the gastrointestinal tract.
Okay.
And it serves the exact opposite purpose. When your stomach is empty, the physical lack of stretch in the stomach wall triggers the release of ghrelin.
Physical stretch.
Yeah. Ghrelin travels to the brain, and it just rings the dinner bell. It aggressively stimulates hunger, it lowers your metabolic rate to conserve energy, and primes your biology to store whatever calories you consume next directly as fat.
You know, instead of using the standard car analogy of a gas gauge and a low fuel light, let's think about this like a massive corporation.
Let's hear it.
Leptin is the chief financial officer.
Okay.
The CFO looks at the corporate bank account, your fat cells, and sees millions of dollars in reserve. The CFO walks into the CEO's office, which is your brain, and says, "We are wealthy. Stop aggressively pursuing new clients, and let's spend some money on infrastructure."
Mm,
That's leptin suppressing hunger and raising metabolism.
right.
Ghrelin, on the other hand, is the panicked floor manager. The warehouse is physically empty right now. He bursts into the CEO's office screaming, "We have no inventory. Stop spending money immediately and acquire resources right now, or we are going under."
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it, because it really highlights that the brain, the CDO, is constantly receiving conflicting reports from different departments.
Right.
And it has to make a decision on how to behave based on those chemical memos.
But wait, if we follow the logic of the CFO metaphor,
Hmm.
if leptin goes up as fat stores increase, shouldn't someone with significant excess body fat simply never feel hungry?
You would think so.
I mean, their CFO is looking at an overflowing bank account.
Mm-hmm.
The leptin should be constantly screaming at the brain, "We have infinite fuel, stop eating." But we know that's not the reality.
Yeah.
What is fundamentally breaking in that line of communication?
You've just identified the central paradox of modern obesity, and unraveling it requires us to look at the battleground where these signals are actually received. A landmark 2024 study mapped out these precise hunger pathways, and it revealed that the brain does not have a single unified appetite center.
It doesn't.
No, you actually have two completely distinct, highly competitive neurological systems fighting for control over your fork.
Two competing systems.
Wow.
This explains so much about human behavior. Unpack the anatomy of this battle for us.
Okay, so the first system is driven by the hypothalamus.
Right.
You can think of the hypothalamus as the purely biological, robotic calorie counter. It is incredibly pragmatic.
Your accountant.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It receives the leptin signals and the ghrelin signals, calculates your metabolic needs, and generates hunger only when you physically require substrate to keep your organs functioning. It eats strictly to survive.
So the hypothalamus is the practical machine. It doesn't care if the food is a raw carrot or a piece of cake. It just looks at the math.
Correct.
But, I mean, we rarely eat based purely on math.
Exactly, because layered over that practical system is the limbic system.
Ah, the limbic system.
Yes. The limbic network is the emotional, reward-seeking, pleasure-driven center of the brain. It doesn't not care about your energy balance. It doesn't care about your fat stores.
What does it care about?
It cares about the dopamine hit that comes from eating hyperpalatable, sugary, fatty foods. It uses food to soothe stress, to celebrate, to alleviate boredom.
Right.
And the massive problem we face is that the emotional desires of the limbic system can completely override the practical mathematical signals of the hypothalamus.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially when we apply this neurological tug-of-war to the concept of dieting.
Oh, yes.
Because for decades, the absolute gold standard medical advice for weight loss has been mathematically simple. Just restrict your calories, eat less, move more.
The oldest advice in the book.
But the source material highlights a massive, frustrating paradox when you introduce constant calorie restriction to this hormonal system.
The eat less, move more paradigm often fails because it completely ignores the endocrinology we are discussing. When you severely and continuously restrict your calories, you are triggering a biological alarm state. The analysis showed a terrifyingly efficient response. The moment you drastically cut calories, your stomach ramps up ghrelin production, and your shrinking fat cells drastically drop their leptin output.
So the panic floor manager is screaming, and the CFO is reporting massive financial losses simultaneously.
Precisely. Now, from your modern perspective, you are just trying to fit into a swimsuit for a vacation.
Right.
But from your body's ancient evolutionary perspective, a sudden, massive drop in caloric intake means one thing. Winter has come early, the crops have failed, and you are actively starving to death.
Wow.
Your body does not understand the concept of a diet, it only understands survival.
So it launches a counteroffensive.
With overwhelming force. The sudden spike in ghrelin combined with the plummeting leptin creates an almost insurmountable biological drive to eat. The hypothalamus screams for calories to survive, and the limbic system fixates on the most calorie-dense foods available. Your metabolic rate plummets to conserve whatever energy is left. You become lethargic, cold, and obsessively focused on food.
You know, I have to ask a question about the evolutionary logic here.
Yeah.
I understand that dropping leptin and spiking ghrelin forces us to seek food.
Mhm.
But if the drive becomes that overwhelming, How did our ancestors survive actual famines or long winters? Wouldn't the sheer stress of that massive ghrelin spike and the obsessive hunger just drive them to exhaustion?
It's a brilliant question, and the answer lies in the nuance of the source material's stance on fasting.
Okay, tell me about fasting versus restriction.
The body actually responds differently to the absolute absence of food, like an occasional water fast, than it does to constant low-level calorie restriction.
Really?
Yes. During a true acute fast, the body eventually shifts into ketosis. It starts utilizing fat for fuel, which actually blunts ghrelin and provides clear mental focus for hunting. Occasional fasting is historically normal. The pathology arises from constant grinding restriction, eating just enough to keep the digestive system active, but never enough to satisfy leptin.
It's like teasing the system.
Exactly. That constant teasing is what completely dysregulates the hormonal balance and makes sustained weight management nearly impossible.
So you are basically fighting a daily grinding war against your own survival programming.
You are.
But leptin isn't just about whether I decide to eat a second slice of pizza, is it? I mean, the source goes into detail about how deeply leptin reaches into other biological functions.
Leptin is a foundational systemic hormone. Because it communicates the absolute energy status of the body, it actually has veto power over incredibly important energy-intensive biological processes.
Veto power, meaning if leptin drops too low, it just starts shutting down major systems to save power.
Exactly. Two of the most critical are immune function and reproductive health.
Let's talk about reproduction first.
Okay, so gestating and nursing a human child requires a phenomenal amount of caloric energy.
Right. Massive energy drain.
If a woman's body fat drops too low, perhaps through extreme endurance athletics or severe dietary restriction, her leptin levels plummet. The brain receives the message: we are starving. We do not have the energy reserves to sustain a pregnancy. The biological response is swift and absolute. The hypothalamus alters its signaling to the pituitary, and the woman stops ovulating entirely.
It just shuts it off.
It shuts down reproduction to save the life of the host.
That is an incredible display of biological triage.
It really is, and it applies to the immune system as well. Generating white blood cells and mounting an immune response against a pathogen requires massive amounts of energy.
Right.
Chronic low leptin signals that energy is scarce, leading to a suppressed immune response. You become significantly more susceptible to illness because your body is literally hoarding energy just to keep your heart beating and your lungs breathing.
That perfectly illustrates how fundamental this hormone is. It's not just a diet hormone.
Not at all.
But we have to circle back to the central mystery here. We understand why low leptin causes chaos. But what about the people with abundant fat stores? Why is their brain not receiving the "I'm full" message?
That brings us to what modern endocrinologists have identified as the primary driver of the global obesity epidemic:
And what's that?
leptin resistance.
Leptin resistance.
This is a pathological state where the adipocytes are completely full. They are pumping out massive, unprecedented amounts of leptin into the bloodstream, but the brain is effectively blind and deaf to the signal.
So, using our corporate metaphor from earlier, the CFO is running into the CEO's office waving the bank statements showing millions of dollars in the account.
Right.
But the CEO has noise-canceling headphones on and is facing the wall.
That is exactly what happens.
The CEO assumes the company is bankrupt and orders the floor manager to keep acquiring inventory.
Because the hypothalamus cannot hear the leptin, it operates under the false assumption that the body is starving. It maintains high ghrelin levels, it refuses to increase the metabolic rate, and the individual experiences unyielding, genuine physiological hunger despite having hundreds of thousands of calories stored as body fat.
And the source material highlights a highly specific, honestly mind-blowing study that actually isolated how the CEO gets those noise-canceling headphones.
The MMP2 mouse study.
Yes.
Yeah.
Walk us through the methodology of this experiment, because the imagery alone is staggering.
This is one of the most vital pieces of research in understanding metabolic dysfunction. The researchers were investigating a specific enzyme, a protein called matrix metalloproteinase 2, or MMP2 for short.
MMP2.
To test its function, they designed an experiment using two distinct groups of lab mice. Both groups were subjected to the exact same environmental conditions and fed the exact same high-fat, hypercaloric diet.
Okay, so an obesogenic diet designed specifically to make them gain weight.
Exactly, but there was one crucial difference. The control group consisted of normal wild-type mice.
Right.
The experimental group, however, had been genetically altered. The scientists basically knocked out the gene responsible for producing the MMP2 protein.
So they physically could not produce this specific enzyme.
Correct.
So we have a genetic fork in the road. What were the results after they consumed this high-fat diet?
The physical divergence was shocking. The normal mice possessing the MMP2 protein reacted as expected to the high-fat diet. They developed severe leptin resistance, lost the ability to regulate their appetite, and grew to absolutely enormous, morbidly obese sizes.
Yeah, the source notes that looking at photographs of these mice is crazy to see.
Oh, they are almost perfectly spherical.
I've seen those lab photos, and they look like furry tennis balls. They literally cannot stop eating. But what about the knockout mice, the ones missing the MMP2 enzyme?
The knockout mice, despite eating the exact same high-fat diet, gained significantly less weight.
Wait, really?
Really. They remained relatively lean and maintained normal metabolic function. By simply removing that single protein, the researchers seemingly immunized the mice against diet-induced obesity.
That is the holy grail of metabolic research. So what is the mechanistic hypothesis here? What is that MMP2 protein actually doing on a cellular level to create such a catastrophic failure in the normal mice?
To understand the mechanism, you have to visualize how hormones work. Leptin travels through the blood, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and arrives at the hypothalamus.
Okay.
But it can't just float around. It has to dock into a specific receptor on the surface of the neuron, much like a key sliding into a lock or a radio signal hitting a satellite dish.
The receptor is the receiving antenna.
Precisely. The researchers hypothesized that the MMP2 protein acts like a pair of biochemical wire cutters.
Wire cutters.
In a state of chronic inflammation, which is often triggered by a high-fat, highly processed diet, MMP2 becomes hyperactive. It physically travels to the hypothalamus and shears off the extracellular domain of the leptin receptor. It literally dismantles the satellite dish.
Oh my God.
So the fat cells are screaming, the leptin is flooding the brain, but there is nothing left for the hormone to bind to. The physical hardware required to receive the "I'm full" message has been destroyed.
That is terrifying.
The brain is biochemically isolated in a state of perceived starvation. The profound conclusion of the study is that if pharmacology or lifestyle interventions can inhibit the overactivity of MMP2, we might be able to stop the destruction of the receptors, restore the brain's satellite dish, and completely reverse leptin resistance.
That visual of the cellular satellite dish being sheared off is just haunting. But, I mean, it forces a deeply uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
We know what triggers this in a laboratory setting with specially bred mice. But for the listener navigating the real world, what is the trigger for us? How does our modern lifestyle create the inflammation that deploys these biochemical wire cutters?
It's the perfect storm, and to understand it, we have to look at the interconnected domino effect of modern living.
Oh.
We have been discussing cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin as if they are separate chapters in a textbook. They are not. They are a deeply integrated web.
If you pull on one thread, the whole web distorts.
Exactly. And the most devastating first domino in the modern world is chronic sleep deprivation.
Which is practically a badge of honor in modern hustle culture. People brag about functioning on 5 hours of sleep.
And they are catastrophically breaking their metabolism by doing so.
How bad is it really?
The clinical data on sleep restriction is undeniable. When you restrict sleep, you trigger an immediate multi-pronged hormonal crisis.
Okay, wrong.
First, sleep deprivation directly stimulates the stomach to produce massive amounts of ghrelin. You wake up with a voracious, unignorable hunger.
Okay.
Second, lack of sleep drastically downregulates your leptin sensitivity. Your brain becomes sluggish at reading the fullness signal.
So you're hungry and you can't get full.
Exactly. And third, poor sleep is perceived by the body as a profound physical stressor, which massively spikes your baseline cortisol.
So just by staying up late to binge watch a show, you wake up the next morning biologically primed to be ravenously hungry, incapable of feeling full, and coursing with a stress hormone that is demanding quick energy.
It is a biological trap. It is a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Because when you introduce that chronically elevated cortisol into the mix, the situation deteriorates even further.
How does cortisol make it worse?
High cortisol directly interferes with the brain's ability to interpret leptin. Furthermore, the chronic stress completely bypasses the practical hypothalamus and hands the steering wheel directly over to the emotional limbic system.
Right, because the hypothalamus just wants basic calories, but the limbic system wants a sedative.
Exactly. When cortisol is flooding your system, your brain feels like it is under attack. The limbic system desperately seeks a neurochemical reward to soothe that panic.
But it doesn't ask for a salad.
It does not ask for a piece of grilled chicken and some broccoli. It demands rapid, dense, highly palatable energy, sugar, fat, and salt.
So this is the physiological origin of emotional eating.
Yeah.
Stress binging, intense late-night craving.
Yes. It is not a lack of discipline. It is the limbic system hijacking the organism to self-medicate a cortisol spike.
And the most insidious, unfair part of this entire equation is that the modern food environment is lying in wait, perfectly engineered to exploit this exact hormonal chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, the source makes a massive point about ultra-processed foods.
The ultra-processed food hijack is arguably the greatest public health crisis of our time.
Right.
The source explicitly details that these foods are not just empty calories. They are mathematically engineered chemical compounds designed in laboratories to bypass the body's natural satiety mechanisms.
They are essentially weapons-grade sensory inputs.
That is scientifically accurate. Because they are pre-digested, hyperpalatable, and stripped of fiber, they absorb into the bloodstream at an unnatural velocity. They cause a massive spike in dopamine in the limbic system, completely overwhelming the subtle leptin signals trying to reach the hypothalamus. The source states that diets high in these ultra-processed foods actively prevent the I'm full signaling pathway from engaging.
Which causes the inflammation.
They cause the inflammation that triggers enzymes like MMP2. They are the biochemical wrecking ball that destroys the satellite dish.
I think about this constantly. And the sheer evolutionary mismatch is staggering. We are essentially taking an elegant, ancient biological system, a system refined over millions of years to perfectly balance energy during times of hunting, foraging, and occasional famine.
Right.
And we are dropping it into an alien landscape. We subject it to artificial blue light at midnight, chronic psychological stress from our inboxes, severe sleep deprivation, and then we feed it mathematically engineered chemical compounds designed to hack the reward centers.
It's amazing we function at all.
Seriously, it's a miracle the human body can maintain homeostasis for even a day under these conditions.
It is a testament to the robust nature of our physiology. But as the source notes, the breaking point is evident. The leptin receptors become desensitized, the cortisol stays permanently elevated, and millions of people find themselves trapped in a body that is actively fighting their attempts to get healthy.
Okay, we have painted a very grim, albeit very realistic picture of how the modern world hacks our biology. But the entire premise of the source material is fundamentally optimistic, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It doesn't just diagnose the disease, it provides the blueprint for taking back control. So what does this all mean for the listener? How do we actually repair the satellite dish and recalibrate this system?
Well, the most empowering realization is that these systems are incredibly plastic.
Adaptable.
Exactly. Just as lifestyle choices can break them, deliberate lifestyle interventions can repair them. You can rebuild receptor sensitivity. The source begins by emphasizing the importance of getting a clear picture of your starting line through dynamic testing.
Dynamic testing, meaning you can't just take a single snapshot of your blood at 8 a.m. and know the whole story.
Correct. Hormones are defined by their rhythm. To truly evaluate leptin, ghrelin, and cortisol, comprehensive physiological evaluations require both fasting samples and post-meal or postprandial sampling.
So you have to see the hormones in action.
You need to see how the hormones react to the introduction of food and how quickly they clear from the blood. You need to map the dynamic profile.
But once you have the map, what are the actual daily actionable strategies to naturally rebalance the scales? Where do we actually start?
The interventions focus entirely on supporting the normal evolutionary function of these pathways. The absolute first pillar is optimizing your protein intake.
Okay, I want to drill down into the why here. Because everyone knows protein is for building muscle, but how does it specifically manipulate these appetite hormones?
Protein is a metabolic powerhouse for two distinct reasons. First, the physical presence of amino acids in the gastrointestinal tract is one of the most potent suppressors of ghrelin.
So it turns off the hunger alarm.
It shuts off the hunger signal rapidly. Second, we have to look at the thermic effect of food, or TTF.
The energy required to process the food itself.
Exactly. The biochemical bonds in a protein molecule are incredibly complex. Your body has to expend a massive amount of caloric energy, sometimes up to 30% of the calories contained in the protein itself, just to break those peptide bonds down into usable amino acids.
Wow.
30%.
Because of this massive digestive friction, protein sits in the stomach longer, digests slower, and provides a much longer-lasting, stable feeling of satiety compared to carbohydrates or fats, which are absorbed incredibly rapidly.
So eating a high-protein meal is like putting a massive, slow-burning oak log on a fire.
Yes.
Whereas eating ultra-processed carbs is like throwing a sheet of newspaper on it. The paper burns incredibly bright for a second, but then it's gone, and you're freezing again 10 minutes later.
That is a perfect analogy. The slow-burning log keeps the ghrelin suppressed and gives the leptin time to register.
Okay, so protein is pillar one. What's next?
The next critical strategy involves the temporal aspect of eating, regular meal timing.
Because the body thrives on a predictable circadian rhythm. The body is a pattern recognition machine. Your digestive tract and your endocrine system anticipate when food is arriving based on your habits.
Oh, interesting.
Maintaining a consistent, regular eating schedule helps entrain the natural rhythms of leptin and ghrelin. When you eat erratically, skipping breakfast one day, grazing all afternoon the next, eating a massive meal at midnight, you are scrambling the biological schedule.
The hormones get confused.
The hormones lose their synchronization. Predictability breeds hormonal stability.
It's about signaling safety to the system. You are proving to the hypothalamus that food is reliable, so it doesn't need to panic and spike the ghrelin.
Exactly.
And I assume the physical movement we discussed earlier plays a role in repairing the damage.
Physical activity is non-negotiable. And the mechanism here goes far beyond the simplistic idea of burning calories.
Right.
Regular, vigorous exercise actively reduces systemic inflammation. By doing so, the clinical data suggests it actually enhances leptin sensitivity. It helps suppress the overactivity of enzymes like MMP2.
So exercise is literally the maintenance crew going up to the roof of the brain and repairing the broken satellite dishes.
Exactly. It clears the inflammatory debris and rebuilds the cellular receptors, making your brain incredibly responsive to the leptin that your fat cells are producing.
So you get fuller, faster.
You start to naturally feel full on smaller amounts of food because the signal is finally getting through loud and clear.
That completely reframes the purpose of working out. I mean, it's not about punishing yourself for what you ate. It's about repairing the communication lines in your brain.
It is purely restorative. And finally, we have to tie it all back to the first half of our deep dive. You must aggressively manage your sleep hygiene and your stress exposure.
Right, the stacking.
If you are doing the deep breathing, the nature exposure, and prioritizing 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep, you are actively driving down that baseline cortisol. And if cortisol is controlled, leptin and ghrelin can finally function without the interference of the panicked limbic system.
So, synthesizing everything we've pulled from this source material, what does this all mean when we look at the big picture? We aren't talking about obscure million-dollar biohacks.
Not at all.
We are talking about eating adequate protein, maintaining a consistent eating schedule, moving your body to repair cellular receptors, managing your stress through breath and nature, and fiercely protecting your sleep. The unifying principle that Gary Brecka and the clinical research seem to emphasize over and over again is simply consistency.
Consistency is the language your biology understands.
Yeah.
These systems are incredibly complex, but they respond to basic daily inputs. They do not demand perfection from you, but they absolutely require a consistent, reliable pattern of signals that repeatedly prove to your biology that it is safe, that it is well-rested, and that it is adequately nourished.
Which perfectly encapsulates the core philosophy radiating from this entire deep dive. The ultimate takeaway here is that your hormones are not some mystical force happening to you. They are a direct reflection of and a response to the specific daily choices you make and the environment you expose yourself to.
That is the most profound and empowering realization a person can have regarding their health. The macronutrients you put on your plate, the consistency of your sleep schedule, the breathwork tools you use to handle the inevitable stress of your afternoon, and whether you take the time to expose your nervous system to the fractal patterns of nature.
All of it.
All of these mundane daily actions act as genetic and hormonal switches. They dictate, on a molecular level, whether these powerful chemical messengers are working synergistically for your longevity or working chaotically against it.
Wow.
When you actively choose to align your lifestyle with the specific way these systems were evolutionarily engineered to function, you stop fighting your biology. You grant yourself an incredible, almost unbelievable amount of control over your resilience, your daily energy, and your metabolic health.
And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Because if you take absolutely nothing else away from the biology, the MMP2 mouse studies, or the neuroanatomy we discussed today, please take away this.
Yeah, listen to this part.
Understanding this complex web of cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin should completely, permanently remove the guilt you carry around your health.
Absolutely.
If you have spent years struggling with intense cravings, battling afternoon exhaustion, or feeling trapped in a cycle of stress, it is not a failure of your character. It is not a lack of moral willpower.
It's a biology.
It is simply your exquisite ancient biology doing exactly what it was programmed to do, trying desperately to keep you alive in a completely alien, unnatural modern environment. Fighting your own biology without understanding its rules is an impossible, heartbreaking uphill battle.
It is.
But now, you actually have the blueprint. You understand the mechanisms, and you can start to work with your body, rather than constantly warring against it.
The transition from blame to biological understanding is the crucial first step in permanently taking over your own health trajectory.
Absolutely. We're going to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building on everything we've synthesized today about the emotional limbic system, that chronic cortisol reallocation protocol, and the chaotic modern environments we navigate daily.
This is a great scenario.
Think about tomorrow morning. Think about the moment you inevitably get an unexpected, highly demanding, stressful email from your boss or a client.
Oh, we all get them.
Pay attention to what happens next. Notice how, exactly 10 minutes later, you find yourself inexplicably standing in the kitchen, staring blankly into the pantry, experiencing a sudden, overwhelming craving for something incredibly sweet or salty.
The limbic system kicking in.
What if you reframe that entire experience? What if that sudden, intense craving isn't a failure of your dietary willpower, but rather a perfect, ancient evolutionary echo? Your brain genuinely perceived a threat. It thought a predator was chasing you, it spiked your cortisol, it actively dropped your leptin to make you hungry, and your limbic system started begging for quick, dense energy just to survive the impending attack.
So true.
The next time that specific cascade happens, recognize the biological illusion. Try stepping outside onto a tree-lined street for 20 minutes and taking 5 deep, diaphragmatic breaths instead of opening the pantry door. You might just find that your biology completely changes its mind. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.